Last time we finished, what was it again? Do you remember what we took last lesson? Right, we took the half that was left in respiration and we took transport, right? Okay, let me share my screen. You can see my screen, right? Okay. Uh, Please ignore this part. I forgot to remove it, but it's fine. Uh, Learning objectives. We don't really need this part. So, do you know what stimuli is? Right, a change in surroundings that an organism or something can detect, right? That's what a stimuli is. So, just like animals, plants, they also have some types of stimuli that they can respond to, right? Even though most of that stimuli, the response is very slow, some species of plants can respond very fast to stimuli. So some examples for that is the Venus flytrap. Did you ever see that before? The Venus flytrap. Well, okay. So, did you ever see how like it works, how it closes on an insect when it touches the trap? Okay. So, uh, basically, that's the part that closes on the insect, and it's basically a modified leaf that has some hairs on it, some kinds of sensors that can detect motion. When it detects that, the modified leaves they can close very quickly and trap the prey. Then after that, the trap starts digesting the prey using enzymes that can secrete. And yeah, well, this is not really a part of the lesson, but do you know the reason why Venus flytraps feed on insects? Well, why are they carnivores then? Okay, so do you remember last time in plant nutrition where we talked about how the plant needs nitrogen, it needs phosphorus, it needs magnesium, right? In order to function properly, right? So for this plant, the soil doesn't really have enough nitrogen for it to like stay alive, for it to function properly. So in order to avoid any problem, the plant gets that nitrogen from insects or other like living organisms instead. Okay, we've talked about some some rapid type of response to stimuli. But as we've said before, plants usually respond in a way slower manner to any kind of stimuli. This response to stimuli is called tropism. Okay, so when a plant responds to stimuli, it can change its growth rate. So, and as we know, the growth rate in different parts is different. So, maximum near the tip of the roots. Okay. So, here, what they're saying is in order for the plant to respond to that stimuli, it needs to grow its cells. It needs to change in some way. It doesn't really have any muscles or anything to move about, right? So instead, it can use its cells, it can increase the size of the cells in order to change the dimensions, in order to change like the growth rate. So for example here, yeah, well, I don't see how, like, what do you mean by sunflower? I don't get it. Oh, you mean like it always faces the sun? I guess, yeah, that's one thing. Hmm. Yeah, that's basically the same thing here. If a plant is being kept, like, let's say, uh, the sunlight on this plant is uneven. For example, you are putting it upright, but shining light from the right side instead of upwards. So the plant is gonna bend towards that light in order to get as much light as possible. Okay. There is also another stimuli instead of light. There's also gravity. If you put the plant in a slanted manner, the plant is always going to try to stay upright. It's going to try to bend itself in order to stay upright. Even if you like keep it in a very dark place without any sunlight, it's still going to bend itself according to gravity. Okay. Well, uh, here is the thing. Upright usually means more sunlight, right? Because sunlight comes from the top, right? Most of the time, it doesn't come from the sides. So even if it's dark, let's say maybe it's nighttime outside and the plant got knocked to its side, it still needs to be upright in order to get the sunlight when the sun comes back up, right? So that's what's happening here. Uh, so, well, it's working against gravity. Basically, gravity is the stimulus, and the plant is trying to counteract the stimulus. Okay, here's what they're talking about here. Uh, when it comes to gravity, it's negative tropism, because as you know, gravity goes downwards, right? So the plant is going to try to go upwards in the opposite direction to the stimulus, right? But for example, for phototropism, the plant is always going to try to grow towards the light source. So that's called positive tropism. Okay. Uh, okay, here they also wrote tropism, where the stimuli is light, is called phototropism. So tropism related to light is called phototropism. Tropism related to gravity is called geotropism. Yeah, I think it's written here. Uh, this should be it for tropism. Okay. So here they're just saying uh, geotropism is negatively geotropic, right? Oh yeah, I forgot to explain this. We've been talking about the shoot, right? But then there is also the root part of the plant. The root part is going to be positively geotropic, right? Because it grows towards the gravity. But is it going to be negatively, what is it called? Does it have negative phototropism, the roots? Well, how would it have negative phototropism then? That isn't how roots work, though. Okay. Uh, well, it can't really detect lights. Like the roots can't detect lights because they don't have chlorophyll, right? So they're not gonna really be negatively phototropic because they can't even detect light stimulus in the first place, right? There is also a third tropism that is not mentioned in the book, but it's fine. Like you can still like know it. So the growth of roots in response to water is called hydrotropism because in some plants, in most plants, the roots are gonna try to grow towards like a water source, right? Because they need to get as much water as they can. Okay. Okay. Uh, so here they're mentioning again, light is gonna be phototropism, gravity is geotropism, water is hydrotropism. This is not really important, but okay. For light grows towards light source, that's the shoot, and gravity grows away from the direction of gravity, which is the shoot again. The roots, most species show no response. Some grow away from the light. While for gravity, it grows in the direction of gravity. It grows downwards. Mm, did they mention auxins and stuff here? Ah, they do. Okay. So forgot to include it here. Uh, let's go down here. Okay. So, most like most plants, they grow from their tips. They don't really grow like evenly from everywhere in the shoot at the same time. They grow from the tips of not the root. They grow from the tips of the stem, right? So there should be a reason that they only grow from the tips, right? So in this case, this is the reason that they grow from the tips. It's not explained here, it's going to be explained in the later slides. But for now, they're just showing an experiment to show that the tips are the parts that cause the shoot to change direction. They're the ones that cause phototropism in this case. So, for example, here you have the tip of the shoot. You remove it and then replace it after putting a mica sheet or mesa sheet. That sheet, it doesn't allow anything to go through it, right? So even if you shine light from a certain direction, there's going to be no response. But then if you replace that mesa sheet or the mica sheet with a gelatin block, there is going to be a response because the gelatin block can allow stuff to diffuse through it. So here, through this experiment, you now understand that there is something happening that has to do with the tip of the shoot, right? Okay. So the stimulus for growth was passed through a material gelatin. Uh, hmm. Okay, it also shows that it's soluble in water, but that's not really important in this case. Okay. So here they're also showing the effect of the tip if placed in a different manner on the shoot. So, for example, if you cut the tip and put it towards the left a bit, the plant is going to grow in the opposite direction. So, what is happening here in this case? So, before we go to the slides downwards, do you know what is happening in this case? Can you guess what's happening? Well, okay. So, uh, the reason in this case is because of a chemical that's only found in the tip of the shoot. Like it's only found in this part of the shoot. So when the shoot detects some kind of stimulus, let's say light coming from a certain direction, that chemical diffuses towards the part that has less light, right? So when it does that, that part grows a lot more than the part that doesn't have that chemical. So as you can see here, that part has grown a lot, right? While this part remained the same. That's why it got curved, right? Okay, so that is what's happening in this case. This tip, the tip of the shoot, got replaced a bit to the left, right? So the chemical can only diffuse downwards towards this part, towards the left. So that's why only the left part grows instead of both of them. Because if it was kept like this, if it was kept just straight on the shoot, the auxins would have diffused evenly, right? Because that's how diffusion works. Diffusion is random. Diffusion always happens evenly. So it's gonna diffuse downwards. So the shoot is gonna grow, but it's gonna grow upwards. It's not gonna really curve. Mm, okay. Here, they're just trying to show that it's not the tip itself that's moving the shoot, but it's actually something inside the tip that gets secreted. So here, they remove the tip and they put it on some agar block. So that agar block, it's gonna absorb some of that chemical, right? And then when you put that agar block on one side of the shoot, that side is again gonna grow unevenly, right? This side is gonna grow more than this side. So it's gonna curve towards the right. So here they're explaining it a bit more. Uh, that is basically the same thing that I was saying, right? Is there any difference? Hmm. So here they're saying again, that hormone, that chemical, is going to diffuse if there is light coming from a certain side, it's going to diffuse in the opposite side of the shoot, which is going to cause the cells on the left to elongate. They mentioned the elongation here. I don't think they did. Okay, so it's going to cause the cells to the left to elongate. It's not going to really divide. The cells are going to elongate instead of dividing. Yeah, they did mention it here. Okay. So that's going to cause the shoot to bend to the right. This hormone, this chemical, is called auxin. Okay. This chemical that's causing all of this, that's causing phototropism. Okay, this should be it for this part. Let's check if we missed anything. I don't really think we did. Yeah, basically that was everything for chemical coordination plants. Is there any part that you don't understand? Are you sure that everything is fine? Hmm? Okay then. Okay, here are the questions. Don't tell me they don't have it. I think they do. I do remember seeing it here. Here, not this one. Okay, let's start with this one. The effect of applying weed killer containing plant hormones to fields of wheat was investigated. In field A, the weed killer was applied each year for 5 years. In field B, no weed killer was applied for 5 years. Each field was 1,000 meters squared and all conditions remained the same. Okay, can you comment on the effect of using weed killer? Hello, can you hear me? Can you try to comment on the effect? Hmm? Well, okay. What's okay? Then what about field A? Okay. Uh, do you know what weed killer is? Okay, so in this case, weed killer, from its name, it kills weeds, right? It doesn't kill wheat, it kills weeds. Okay, yeah, okay. So what do they weeds? Okay, but okay, that's not really how. Okay, so I did not talk about this because it wasn't included in the lesson. But weed killers, they're specifically made to target weeds. They basically have chemicals that are only found in monocots, if I remember correctly. Basically, it only has chemicals that are found in a certain type of plant. Basically, wheat is not that type of plant, so this chemical doesn't really interact with it. It's not able to interact with wheat. So in this case, what they want here in this question is just to comment in the effect. Like for example, you can say field A, it had no, they okay, they're asking you to comment on the effect of using weed killer. What did that weed killer do? You don't really have. Well, okay, but what did weed killer do? It killed the weeds, right? So there is less competition on nutrients and water with wheat plants. So there is higher wheat yield in field A than field B, right? Let's just check the marking scheme just in case. Fields with weed killer had a higher crop yield. The difference in crop yield varies. This must be caused by some external factor. The weed killer caused the weeds to overgrow and die, reducing competition for resources. Okay, I did not mention this because it wasn't mentioned in the book, but weed killer is basically a version of auxin. Remember auxin? Basically, this version of auxin is only found in these types of weeds. So when that auxin, when you spray it on these weeds, it's as if the shoot, remember the shoot, right? It produces auxin, right? It's as if the shoot all of a sudden produced a lot of auxin at the same time in all of these weeds. So what happens is the plant tries to grow very fast. So it's as if it's uh, eating itself. It doesn't have enough nutrients, it doesn't have enough glucose, it doesn't have enough amino acids in order to sustain that growth. So it causes the weeds to just grow, to just die, basically overgrow and die. Okay. Figure 5 shows young tomato plants growing in a glasshouse. Young tomato plants are growing towards the light. Okay, explain how a plant hormone causes these shoots to grow towards the light. That's called phototropism, right? Hmm. So yeah, how does this chemical work again? How does that plant hormone work? Like in this case, the light is being shined from a certain direction, right? The light is unidirectional. So what's happening with that hormone, with that plant hormone? It was auxin. AUXIN. So, hmm, what does it do? Right. So let's say if the light is being shined from the left side, what is auxin gonna do? What is the shoot gonna do? No. Oh, wait. The auxin is produced in the tip. It doesn't get produced in the side. What happens is that auxin diffuses towards the side that has less light. It diffuses to that side. No. Yeah, it just diffuses towards the side, towards the dark side. So when it does that, the cells on that side start to elongate. They start getting longer, which basically bends the plant towards the light. Okay. Let's check it. Okay, so auxin moves to the shaded side, causing cell elongation. Okay. So figure 15 shows a pot plant before it fell over, and the same one after 2 weeks. Uh, Explain how hormones in the roots and the shoots of the plant cause this directional growth. So here in this case, okay, yeah. In this case, can you see the number of marks that's written there? They do want a lot of things then, right? They don't only want one thing. So what are they going to need in this case? How many types of how many kinds of tropism first are there? Right, there's gonna be hmm? Yeah, it's fine. That's how you say it. Okay, you said phototropism. It's gonna be the second one's gonna be right, geotropism. So in the case of phototropism, what's happening? No, no, phototropism. Tip of the shoot, right? Hmm. Hmm. Right, the right. Okay. Okay. And then what else happens? Hmm. What else happens in this case? Right, geotropism. So can you see anything else that changed besides the shoot? Well, okay. Are you sure you can't see anything that changed other than the shoot? Okay, yeah, that's basically what I'm talking about. We already know that roots, in which direction do the roots grow? Right, geotropism. So what can you say in that case? It's basically the same with auxin. You can just say that hormones or auxin, it just diffuses downwards, causing the roots to grow towards the gravity. Geotropism. That should be it for the 6 marks. Auxins, move to the shaded part, cause cells to elongate, making it bend. Example of positive phototropism. Auxins collect in large amounts on the underside of the root, inhibiting cell elongation, causing the cells above to elongate faster, causing uh, no, no, you just have to include the 6 of them, at least most of the time. But okay, here's the thing though. They don't really specify if it's 1 mark per point. They just give some kinds of levels. So it's gonna depend on how well you explain it. Like, okay, yeah, you do have to include like at least 6 points to get the 6 marks, but then you have to connect these points together. You can't just say like point oxen, point move to the shaded part of the plant shoot, point cause cells to elongate. Uh, okay. Just wait a second. Did they mention that in the book? Okay, they did not mention it. Okay, but basically, uh, the side of the root inhibiting auxins. In the case of the roots, it, as we've said before, it collects in large amounts on the underside, right? But in this case, for the roots, it instead inhibits cell elongation at that underside. So it causes the cells above to elongate faster than the ones below. So that's why the root can grow downwards. Okay. This is an example of positive gravity tropism or geotropism. Explain how phototropism is controlled in plant shoots. It's again the same as the second question that we solved, but this time it's for 3 marks instead of 2, right? Yeah, they. Okay. Hmm. Right. But that's only if light is coming from a certain direction. If light is unidirectional, right? Okay. Uh, if it's coming from like all directions, basically oxygen is gonna distribute evenly. So the shoot is just gonna grow like upwards. Let us just check it. Phototropism is controlled by auxin. Auxin moves towards the shaded side, causing cell elongation, causing the shoot to bend towards the light. Some weed killers contain plant hormones. Explain how plant hormones work as weed killers. No, but okay, but how do they work though? How do they cause it to overgrow? Like just say the same thing as auxin. Like in auxin, what does auxin do? Like a norm Right, auxin diffuses in the shoot, causing cell elongation, right? Okay, so then you can say that what's happening? How is that hormone acting as a weed killer? It's the same thing as the first question. Hmm. Now, it causes the weeds to overgrow, right? Okay, just give me a second. So auxins act on broadleaf, only acts on weeds, causing them to overgrow, and weed killers do not kill grass plants. Okay, so the type of plant, I didn't mention that before, it only acts on broadleaf plants. That is, okay, you remember the two types of plants, monocots, dicots? It basically only acts on dicots. So when it acts on these weeds, it's going to be able to make them overgrow, right? So it's going to kill the weeds, but not but not kill any grass plants. For example, wheat or well, grass, right? Okay. Uh, this is again the same thing as the 6 mark question that we solved before. Can you try to solve it again? Okay, but in this case, they're asking why the growth has been changed. So Yeah, because in this case, they don't really need the roots. They need something else in addition to like the phototropism. So what do you think they need? They're ask No, they're asking here why the growth has changed. You need to explain all of the things that have changed in this case in order for the growth to change, right? So, for example, before tipping, before like it was placed on the site, what was happening? Right, because right, that's basically it. And also gravity. Uh, okay, the shoots were growing opposite to gravity, right? Negative geotropism. Okay, so what changed after that? Yeah, just the same thing, basically. Yeah, basically the same thing, yeah. So again, the same thing as the last one. Oxygen produced in the tip diffuses towards the shaded part, causes the shaded part to elongate, causing the plant to stand upright again. Where is the question? Here. Uh, the plant stem bends, stem is longer, growing upwards, has more leaves. Okay. For some reason, they wanted that to be included. Yeah, just like that's something I guess that you observed, but that has nothing to do like with philotropism or geotropism. Then explanation: oxen shaded area, elongation, phototropism, negative geotropism, more cells growing towards the light. Leaves are not in the shade to absorb more light. Photosynthesis. We've basically like said more than the six like points that they needed, so it's fine. Uh, Gardener decided to kill the dandelion plants growing in his lawn. The gardener set up a trial to see which concentration of weed killer would kill the most dandelions and be most economical. Counted the number of dandelion plants in six 1 meter squared areas of the lawn, made six different concentrations of weed killer solution. He applied the solutions to each of the six different areas. After 2 weeks, he counted the number of dandelion plants in each area. Okay, so give one variable the gardener should control when completing his trial. Okay, do you remember what a control is? Something, a variable that you need to control. In this case, the weed killer is the independent variable, right? What is the dependent variable? Right, the amount of plants killed. No, the amount of. Well, 1 second. The amount of dandelion plants still alive after 2 weeks, right? That's the dependent variable. That's the one that's changing. But what is one variable that should not change? A variable that needs to be controlled. Well, technically, he already controlled it. So you need to like provide something else that wasn't provided in the question. That could be one. But then did they say percentage after 2 weeks? Content. But there are a lot of like easier things. Like what things do every plant need? Right, like uh what's it called? The amount of water provided, the amount of sunlight provided. These are all things that should be controlled. These are all variables that need to be controlled, right? So let's go down here. Temperature, pH of soil, use same volume of solution. Make sure all areas have the same amount of light, water, or minerals. Okay, so here, oh, by the way, they said volume of wheat killer solution. I think you said concentration, right? When you were talking about control. Yeah, in this case, you are also going to have to control the volume, right? You're changing the concentration, but you are going to keep the volume, the amount of wheat killer the same. It's just the concentration that you're changing. State and explain the conclusions the gardener can make based on his trial. What conclusion can he come to after like this trial? Okay, that's okay. State and explain, right? So you have to state and explain. State things from the table and explain these things from the table. Mhm. You skipped a lot of information in the middle. You skipped a lot of information in the middle. Okay, so in this case, the best thing, okay, first you can say that concentration between 0% and 20%, the number of dandelion plants before is going to be equal to after, right? Then at concentration 40%, two out of the seven dandelion plants were killed, right? And and as you increase the concentration above 40, more dandelion plants are being killed, right? So at 60, six plants out of the eight were killed. At 80, all of the plants, so eight out of eight plants were killed, right? You need to like explain everything in the table. You can't just like explain the first one, then explain the last one. Mm, okay. 80 is the best concentration because it kills maximum amount. At lower concentrations, all weeds are not killed because high concentration. I guess what I said was not correct then. Okay, let's check the question again. Okay, so in this case, they want you to state and explain the conclusion. They didn't want you to state and explain anything at all in the table other than the conclusion. which is that 80 kills all of the dandelions. It's fine though, it's fine. Uh, moving on. For now, let's leave this to the end. How much time is left, by the way? There's still a lot of time left. We can solve a couple more questions before we go to the next lesson. A student wanted to investigate the effect of light on the growth of cress seedlings. The student had 3 pots of seedlings grown in different conditions. A was placed in a window with light from one direction only. B was placed in a cupboard with no light. C was placed with light from the above. Can you try labeling them? Right. Which one is this? The first pot? Right, okay. 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 Okay, great. Uh, what is the response shown by the seedlings in pot A? Right, because they're growing towards the light. Say the plant hormone that causes the right ox. The student wanted to find out the hormone that caused the response to directional found at the direction light. Uh, okay, the student had 2 growing plant shoots and placed them both in a window with light coming from one side. Describe a method the student could use to show that the hormone was found in the tip of the plant shoot. Right? You don't have to place the tip of the plant shoot. Well, or okay. Well, because they're asking in this case, they wanted to show that the hormone was found in the tip of the plant shoot, right? So you can just remove the tip for the first experiment, right? Okay, what about the second experiment? You don't have to use like gelatin and the like other one. What was it called? Because I don't want to misspell it. Here it is, Mika sheet or Mesa sheet. You can just remove the shoot and leave it for the second plant, right? Or there's also another way. You could cover the shoot, right? You could cover, I mean, the tip of the shoot so that no light, no sunlight can reach it. Okay. Uh, let us check King scheme here. Remove the tip and leave the other. Measure the changes in growth and direction of movement. Okay. So first, we're gonna first talk about sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction, it needs 2 parents. It involves the fusion of female and male cells, that is gametes. Parents and offspring are not identical to each other. It's slower and it produces variation in the same species. While asexual, it only involves one parent. For example, that happens in bacteria, right? Bacteria, they divide by binary fission, which is basically asexual reproduction. So, yeah, that's basically the same thing too. So it only involves one parent. no gametes are produced or needed for that matter. Parent and offspring are identical to each other, and it's a lot faster than sexual reproduction because it doesn't need any gametes, it doesn't need any fusion of male and female cells, and it only needs one parent. But the downside to that is that there is no variation between that parent and the offspring. So, uh, in the case of asexual reproduction, we can talk about budding in yeast, which is one example for that. So, first, the nucleus replicates, then it migrates to one end, and part of that cell grows into a bud. So, basically, do you know mitosis? Do you know how cells in a human body they divide equally, right? No, in this case, instead of it dividing equally like how cells in a human body would, the nucleus just replicates, divides off, then takes a small part of the cell in order to grow a bud. And that bud can grow again in order to create a new cell. Again, this is what you were talking about. Example of asexual reproduction, vegetative reproduction in potato plants. And runners in strawberry. You know how strawberries, they do have seeds, right? But at the same time, they have something called runners, which they can use in order to asexually reproduce and produce more strawberry plants. Uh, okay, now they're just going to be talking about the stamen and carpel. So you know how flowers, they're divided into like a lot of parts, right? Like you have the petals, you have the stamen, you have the carpel, you have just everything else. Right now, we're only going to be concentrating on the stamen and the carpel. So, first, you have the stamen. The stamen has two parts, two important parts at least. You have the filament, which holds the anther upright. Okay. Then you have the stigma for the female part, the style, and the ovary. Okay. Uh, then here they're just talking about two types of pollinating agents. So, you know how flowers they can both um, self-pollinate and cross-pollinate, right? So, in the case of cross-pollination, the flower needs some way in order to let that pollen travel from one flower to another, right? So, in this case, this is where pollinating agents come in. There are mainly two types of pollinating agents. They're not exhaustive. There are other pollinating agents, but the two main ones in this case are insects and wind. An example for like an insect pollinating flower would be, for example, let's say a sunflower or a tulip or a rose, right? They usually rely on some type of insect as a pollinating agent. Okay. For the wind, you can, for example, take dandelions. You know how dandelions they are usually pollinated using the wind, right? They have some small umbrella-like structures which can the seeds they can use them in order to be carried away using the wind, right? Okay. So here they're just giving you some differences between insect pollinated and wind pollinated flowers or plants. Insect pollinated, they usually have large colored petals with guidelines. Uh, Basically, these flowers, as you can see here, they have large petals, right? Which are brightly colored in order to attract insects. And they also have guidelines guiding the insect towards where the nectar is in that flower. Okay. They also have some kind of scent that can attract these insects in order for them to actually like find the flower, right? What comes from the nectar? Well, I guess one part of it would be the nectar, but some of the scent also comes from like the petal. It comes from other structures in the flower. Uh, okay, as I was saying, they have a nectary on which insects feed. Basically, what produces that nectar. They have a sticky stigma for pollen grains to stick on it. Basically, you know, when insects feed on that nectar, some of the pollen gets stuck on their coat, right? Then, when they travel to another flower, that pollen again can stick on that sticky stigma of a flower in order for the pollen to actually like reach the second flower, right? In order for cross pollination to happen. Okay? The female and male organs are enclosed in the flower. They're both inside the petals, right? And the pollen grains are larger with spikes to hold on the insect body. Because as you're going to notice, for wind pollinated, they're usually very small and they don't really have any spikes. They're very small because they need to be carried by the wind, right? So they need to be as small as possible. Okay. So when pollinated, they have small green petals, no guidelines, because they're not trying to attract insects. They have no scent, no nectar. They have a feathery stigma to catch pollen in the air. And the female and male organs are hanging outside the flower because if it was inside the flower, it's going to be harder for wind to reach it, right? That's why instead they hang outside the flower so that for the stamen, for what's it called? Uh, yeah, for the stamen, pollen can be carried by the wind, right? And for the stigma, pollen can reach and stick onto that stigma, right? Okay. Uh, okay. Right now we can just open the book because that's where the PPT stops. Okay. First, they're talking about asexual reproduction again. There's all about how a part of the plant can break away before developing into another plant, right? Uh, okay, this we've already talked about that. Another type of asexual reproduction is to grow plants from cuttings. I didn't mention that, but you know potatoes, right? You don't have to put the full potato, the full budding potato, into soil for it to actually grow into a potato plant. You could just grow, you can just cut a part of that potato that is budding and place it inside the soil and water it. You don't really have to put the whole the potato inside the soil. Okay. Are you there? Hello. Are you sure? I'm gonna take your word for it. Let's continue where we stopped then. Sexual reproduction in plants. So first, there are two gametes in the case of plants. There are pollen grains, which are the male gametes, and egg cells or ova, which are the female gametes. So they're here mentioning pollination develops into a seed and in turn enclosed in a fruit. Okay. Okay. And you do remember that if pollen grains are transferred from the anthers of a flower to the stigma of the same flower, it's called self-pollination, right? And if it occurs with another flower, it's called cross-pollination. A different flower in a different plant, of course, not like the same plant. It does have to be the same species, yeah. Because, okay, do you know what the definition of a species is? Okay, a species is basically organisms that share same characteristics and they can interbreed together. So, for example, if you have like two different species, they're not going to be able to interbreed together. Like if pollen falls on like the stigma, it's not really going to be able to fuse with the ova and form a gamete or a seed. Okay. Here they're just summarizing the differences between insect pollinated and wind pollinated again. Do I have to explain it again, or do you understand it from PowerPoint? Okay. Okay, we stopped here in the PowerPoint. We only have like one more page after that. But basically, when a pollen grain lands on the stigma, okay, here, pollen grain from another flower lands on the stigma. So when it lands on that stigma, it grows a tube down the style, which is that part that's separating the stigma from the ovary. Okay. Then that tube moves down until it reaches the ovary and in turn the ovule. Okay. That tube will basically carry the male gamete inside that the pollen grain and allow it to reach the egg cell nucleus. So when it reaches the egg cell nucleus, it's going to be able to fuse uh, with the egg cell nucleus and form a zygote or yeah, a zygote or a seed. Okay. So first, the zygote. Okay, they're explaining how a seed is formed now. Once fertilization has occurred, a number of changes take place in the ovule and ovary. Okay, so here they're just mentioning the ovule becomes the seed and the ovary becomes the fruit, right? You can think of it as basically the ovary surrounds something called the ovule, right? And that ovule surrounds something called the egg cell, which is even smaller than the ovule. So that uh, ovary is going to form the fruit, the ovule is going to form the seed, and the egg cell is going to form the embryo, which is the plant itself, the baby plant itself. Okay. So the zygote develops into an embryonic plant with a small root called the radicle and a shoot called the plumule. Okay, so basically, I don't think they showed a diagram here. Is this the seed? Okay, here. They don't really show a specified diagram of the seed, but basically it's gonna have two parts, two main parts at least. The part called the radical and the part called the plumule. The radical is the root, and the plumule is the shoot of the zygote. Not the zygote, the embryo. The embryo. Uh, okay. The other contents of the ovule develop into a food store for the young plant when it germinates. Because for germination, the seed, no, not the seed, the embryo is gonna need some kind of food source, right? In order for it to grow. Because right now it's under the soil. It doesn't really have any sunlight. It can't really photosynthesis. It can't undergo photosynthesis. So it needs some kind of food store for it to grow enough in order for it in order for it to start to photosynthesize, right? Okay. Let me just get some water because my throat is very dry. Okay, just 1 minute. Okay, I'm back. We stopped in germination. So here they're saying that the seed contains a plant embryo consisting of the radical, the plumule, and one or two seed leaves called cotyledons. Okay. It also contains a food source either in the cotyledons or another part of the seed. During germination, the food source is used up, providing nutrients to allow the radical and plumule to grow. Uh, the radical grows down into the soil where it can absorb water, right? And then the shoot grows upwards towards the light so that the shoot can start to undergo photosynthesis. Once the plant starts to photosynthesize, the germination is going to be over. The plant, the baby plant, is not going to need any nutrients or anything from the seed anymore, right? Seeds of plants such as peas or beans have two cotyledons. They're called dicots. Seeds of grasses and other narrow leaf plants, they're called monocots. They only have one cotyledon. Okay, I think I explained this part last lesson, right? Basically, the plants that have two cotyledons, they're called dicots or dicotyledonous plants. Plants that only have one cotyledon, they're called monocots. And both of them, they have some features that differentiate them from each other. Do you remember the features? For example, like monocots, they have fibrous roots. They have narrow leaves. Do you remember these stuff? Are you confident you remember these stuff? That's not very reassuring. So do you remember it or not? Okay, I don't think they mention it here. Okay, so all you need to know is uh, plants that are dicots, they have two cotyledons, right? Their seed, you can split it into two. That's how you can think of it. Hmm? Yeah, like a pea or a bean or something. You can split that bean or pea into two parts. The seed itself has two distinct parts, while monocotyledons, they only have one part. For example, corn or wheat or any other monocotyledon. So, okay, as I was saying, the dicots, they have very broad leaves. Let me just show you here. Their leaves look a lot broader, like they're not long, they're very short and broad. Okay. While monocots, they're very long. You know, like the leaves. Excuse me for a second. Monocot leaves, they're very narrow and long when compared to dicot leaves. Like corn leaves, yeah. Uh, okay. Also, dicots, if you can see here, their veins, they're usually very branched when compared to monocots. Monocot veins, not veins, monocot veins, they're usually parallel to each other. They're not really, what's it called? They're not striked. They're not, what was the word again? They're not branched. Yeah, they're not branched. Okay. Then you also have one more thing, which is that, let me just show you a picture here. Okay, here. So dicot roots, they're tap roots. Basically, you can think of it as there is one main root going downwards with some smaller branches coming out of it. But for monocots, they have very branched roots. They don't really have one main root that's going downwards, where most of the other roots branch from. Okay, does that make sense? These are just like the four things that you need to know. Like monocots, they only have one cotyledon. They have uh, narrow and long leaves. Their veins are parallel, and the roots are fibrous. They're not really tap roots. Do you understand it now, or is there anything? Okay. Okay. So, if when a seed is formed, it doesn't start germinating right away, right? It only starts to germinate once it reaches a suitable place where it can actually start germinating, where it can stay alive. So in this case, there should be some stuff that determine when the germination is going to start. Okay, so when the seeds are dispersed from the plant, they're usually very dry, containing only 10% water. So what actually starts germination are three main things. First, you have warm temperatures so that enzymes can act efficiently. That's why there are a lot of plants that basically form their seeds during the winter or right before the winter, and the seeds remain dormant until spring comes so that it can start germinating efficiently, right? It's gonna have enough sunlight, it's gonna have enough water, and it's gonna have a warm temperature in order for the enzymes to actually work properly. Okay, then you have water. So if the seed goes into a soil, into some type of soil, but there is not enough water for the plant to actually grow, the seed is not going to start growing, right? It's still going to remain dormant until there is enough water. And then there is also oxygen. The plant needs oxygen in order for it to break down the stored carbohydrates, right? In order for it to break it down and actually start germinating. If there is no oxygen, the plant can't really germinate. The seed can't really germinate because it cannot use up the food source, the food storage that it has inside the seed, right? Okay, so for now, you just need to remember the three most important stuff for germination. That is warm temperature, water, and oxygen. Here, this is just an experiment to show what we're talking about. Again, this is just basically the exact same thing. Here, they gave it enough water, they gave it enough oxygen, but they decreased the temperature. Here, they gave it the best temperature for it, they gave it water, but then they removed any type of oxygen that could reach the seeds. They boiled the water so that it doesn't have any oxygen in it, and they put a layer of oil so that oxygen from the air can't diffuse into the water. Then for this one, they gave it enough air, they gave it a favorable temperature, but then they didn't give it any water. They gave it a dry cotton wool, so there's no water in it. Then for this one, they gave it everything possible for the need in order for it to germinate. Okay, so here we're just showing you A will start to germinate, but there's not going to be any germination in B or C because B, it doesn't really have any water for the seeds to grow, and C, it doesn't have any oxygen for germination to take place. For D, there is going to be some germination, but it's going to be a lot slower than A because the temperature is not very favorable for the enzymes, right? Right? Okay. Uh, so here they're asking, do you have any criticisms for this method? Are there any variables in this case that are not controlled? What are you saying again? Yeah, sunlight could be one of the things that can affect the germination. What else is there? This case, the amount of chickpeas, right? They never mentioned that they kept it the same during the whole experiment. Hmm. There is also, okay, I guess that is technically controlled. Okay, that's fine then. Do you understand everything here? Can we move on to the past papers then? Okay. Right now, we've basically finished uh, of the chapters that are coming in your exam. When is your exam again? Okay, that's fine then. For now, let's start with some questions on this chapter, which I'm not sure if I have any on. Okay, I guess here they included both of them. Explain one advantage of sexual reproduction. Here they're saying basically, if a plantlet touches soil, it will grow roots and become a new plant. That's an example of asexual reproduction, right? It's the same thing that happens with potatoes or oh, what was it called again? Oh, strawberries, yeah. Uh, the plant in figure 9 also produces flowers for sexual reproduction. Explain one advantage of sexual reproduction. What was the difference, the key difference between sexual and asexual? Oh my god, don't tell me you don't remember anything from there. Okay, so we've already said that sexual reproduction, it's a lot slower than asexual. It needs gametes, it needs two parents, right? So why do plants bother with sexual reproduction? The key advantage of sexual reproduction is that it produces variability. Okay, the offspring is going to be different from its parents. Okay, basically, if there is some type of disease that is affecting a plant population, if, yeah, yeah, I think it was with banana plants. There was a disease that was affecting these banana plants, but all of these like species of banana plants, they were all asexually reproduced. So basically, they were genetically the same. So that disease is going to affect all of the plants in the same way. But if they were reproducing and using sexual reproduction, the plants are going to be different from each other. They're going to be genetically different. Some of these plants are going to be more resistant to that disease. Some of them are going to be less resistant, right? So that the species can continue to live on. Different alliers gives variation, so it's able to survive in different conditions. Okay, this is also like this part is mixed with sexual reproduction in humans, but it should be fine in this case. Okay, that's all you have to know. Like it produces some variation so that it makes its adaptability or it allows the plant's offsprings, the plant, to survive in different conditions. Mm, okay, the problem here is that they're very mixed with the rest of the chapters. Let me just check the book again. You only finished the first three sections, right? First three units. Mm. Questions are very mixed with Unit 5 and Unit 2. It's fine then. We can just pick the questions we can solve and leave the rest for now. Okay, explain why asexual reproduction in strawberries is beneficial to strawberry farmers. Right, it's faster. So, yeah, that's basically, yeah. So it's gonna be faster. Asexual reproduction is gonna be faster than sexual reproduction, right? So, hmm, well, sexual reproduction, you don't really have to change the environment. It's just that they can adapt to different environments. Like they can stay alive in different environments. If, for example, like the environment suddenly changes, some of them are going to be better adapted to that newer environment. Some of them are going to die, right? Where the others are going to stay alive. Okay, so here, where is it? Here. Okay, asexual reproduction is a rapid reproduction technique. There is no requirement for cross pollination, higher crop yield, increased profit. Okay, mm, let's go to the next question then. Strawberry fruits containing the seeds are produced after a flower is fertilized. Explain why seed production is an advantage to the strawberry plant. Again, it's the same thing as the first question that we solved. How is sexual reproduction helpful? How is seed production helpful in this case? No, 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 you don't have to explain that much. I was just trying to explain to you how variability works. You don't really have to go into detail. You can just say uh, it produces variability. Cross pollination produces variability, so it can be better adapted. It can like increase its survivability of the new seed or the new plant. You can also mention seed production. It's gonna allow the new plant to grow further away from the parent plant, right? Because in the forerunners, they have to like grow very close to the parent plant because the runners aren't going to be able to go very far away. Here, introduces variation, which allows for natural selection of fitter plants, increased chance of population surviving. Okay. Again, this is basically the same question. Some plants reproduce sexually. Give one advantage to this type of reproduction. It's just one mark, so what do you have to say? Oh my god. Yeah, just basically variability. That's it. You don't really have to like explain anything other than variability. 1 second. It's six, right? Yeah, variability. It changes, produces genetic diversity. Okay. Name the process that forms gametes for sexual reproduction. I don't think you have that right now. Yeah, you don't really have it right now, so it's fine. Name the type of reproduction involving flowers. What is the type of reproduction involving flowers? Right, sexual reproduction. What is the advantage of reproduction through flowers? Right, there's variation in the offspring. This is basically it for the questions right now. Uh,